get into black hole depression. It wasn't something that if it was going to happen that I could consciously avoid. It just wasn't part of my makeup, which made me feel a lot happier about it, because at least I was only dealing with one end of the problem. So soon after that, I did go into counselling, and it was a long process. I probably went regularly weekly for about 5 years, and after about 3 years, I came off lithium. It's not recommended to do that. This was my second attack, and a lot of the doctors and the psychiatrists don't really work a lot with coming off lithium. They say that you need to be on it for life. I was told I had to be on it forever, which frightened me. We did have a discussion about how dangerous the illness was, and I have a feeling that the psychiatrist was trying to frighten me into taking my medication, but what the result was that he frightened me into actually doing something about it. So I was taking my medication, I was being very strict about my regime, my eating, my sleeping, etc. I was having massage, going to yoga, doing all the complementary things that I knew would be helpful, and also went into counselling. And initially it was just focused on the bipolar behaviour, and ultimately it became me, who I am, what triggers me, relationships with my mum, my husband, my children, the work that I was doing, everything. It was just my life. And ultimately it became a self-growth course, I suppose you could have called it, almost like a private course. It wasn't particularly related to bipolar anymore, it became much bigger than that. And I think it was a process of understanding who I was, recognizing symptoms, watching, looking at bad habits, self-sabotaging behavior, understanding why and how I had always through my life suppressed my emotions. I wasn't very au fait with being able to express how I felt and putting my emotions into words, and they were being bottled up. It was unhelpful, and that I had gone the academic route and gone down the route of sciences and engineering and working and intellectual and academic, and hadn't really got into the arts and the expression, and so that was a part of my life that I needed to develop. Then I was fine going to counselling, doing all the things that I needed to do, not on medication anymore, bravely thinking that I was cured. And in 2003, I had my last episode, and we were away on holiday overseas. It was a time in England of masses of pollen, so I was sneezing and breathing badly and sleeping badly and very overstimulated. Interrupted sleep, great excitement. We went on a sailing holiday in Croatia with our young children, and it was a fabulous holiday. But of course, who wants to be asleep when at 2 o'clock in the morning you can watch the mast bobbing on the water and the seagulls and the full moon? You actually don't want to be asleep. So when I got back, personal circumstances, my domestic helper's son had been murdered. I had to try and help her with that. It was just another situation of not enough sleep, not enough eating, not enough routine, overstimulation, and just there seems in a person who suffers from mania that there isn't a shut-off mechanism. When other people are tired, they go to sleep, they back out, they say no, and they recover. Certainly with me, and I think this is the norm with mania, is that there is no shutdown mechanism. We don't know when to stop. So we keep going, and I know I never get tired. I just go and go and go. And I have to externally manage my rhythm at that time, because my body just pushes through it. And who knows why? It's difficult to say. So at that time, I again went willingly into a clinic, a very nice private clinic, in order to rest, get away from my responsibilities, away from my family, children, work, and just go and sleep and read for a whole weekend. It was a perfect decision, only unfortunately this fabulous clinic didn't have any means of monitoring that I was eating and sleeping, and of course I didn't sleep or eat a whole weekend. I remember quite clearly the woman who did the food brought in the tray, took away one and put down another one, and untouched. there was nobody coming in at night to see that I was sleeping, and certainly no one watching me, although I remember talking to one of the night staff and saying, now I've got a mechanism for you to help me go to sleep. You squeeze my hand and I'll squeeze your hand, and you squeeze my hand and I squeeze your hand. And I'm lying there quite still with my eyes closed, and when eventually I stop responding with the squeezing, it will mean that I'm asleep. Could you please do this exercise with me? Now, I mean, this was motivated by me, and it was night and nobody was needing her, so I was lucky. And I remember, asking her to put me to sleep like that. But I found that surprising as well, that in a clinic where you are asking for help because you're suffering from exhaustion and you need to be strengthened and relaxed, that there's no mechanism whereby they check that you're eating and sleeping. And those are two pretty simple, straightforward things, and everybody needs to eat and sleep whatever your condition is. And slowly I became very frustrated, because there I was in this expensive clinic and there weren't things like loo paper and a towel. So just somebody had, slipped up, and I kept asking and these things weren't coming. I got to a point where I was really quite revved up, and now I was tripping into a little bit of paranoia, because there was the funny incident, because I do remember laughing at myself about this, when I thought that the cleaning woman was actually the head psychologist, and she was observing me, and they were testing how far they could push me before I would crack, and that they weren't giving me these simple things like a towel so that they could see, and then that they had created this ingenious way of observation without me knowing, and that actually this was what the cleaning woman was all about. And another time when I suddenly started thinking that everybody around me was dying, that my counsellor had a bad cold, and she'd said something about my mum and my doctor, and they were all dying, and I was in a complete panic, until again there were obviously moments of lucid thinking, because I stopped myself and said, this is definitely paranoid, because they might be ill and somebody might be dying, but they can't all be dying at the same time. So there were flashbacks in and out of paranoia, and then coming to my senses. And finally, when I tried to make a cup of tea and the kettle wasn't working properly, and it exploded with boiling water all over the floor of the room, and luckily I had gone into the bathroom so that I wasn't hurt by the boiling water, I actually flipped. And I think it was because I had been consulting with a friend client about their daughter who had been very, very severely burnt by boiling water. And it was, oh my goodness, what could have happened to me? Thank goodness I was away, and this kettle is defective. This is another thing that's not right in this supposedly amazing place. And I stormed off down to the nurse's station. Well, it was loud and it was extravagant and willful, and I've discovered that she actually knew the kettle was defective and that they hadn't done anything about it. Well, that just sent me over the top. So there were lots of these little incidences, and again, it was in a clinic, so it wasn't too terribly bad. But at one point, I came out of my room and I started banging on a door. And from down the passage comes a voice. Who's making that noise? Because you're not allowed to make a noise, interfere with clients. There's certain rules and regulations, and I suppose everyone has to have their rules. And of course, making a noise is definitely against the rules. And one of the head psychiatrists said, who's making that noise? And I said, me. I had a reason. I was owning up. And he grabbed my hands by the wrists, both of them, and he said, if you don't keep quiet, I will lock you up. And I remember it quite clearly, and I was shocked by it. And of course, I scurried back into my room very quiet. A good little girl, didn't want to be locked up, and certainly didn't want anyone shouting at me. But again, it was another incident of, they're supposed to be there to help me. Clearly, I was upset about something. Why didn't anybody ask? It could have just all so easily have been sorted out. I could have told them. I mean, I said, send me your managing director, because I've got at least 20 things I can suggest to improve this place. And it was just another situation where, because of some definition of unacceptable behavior, nothing was dealt with. Nobody asked how you were feeling, what they could do, how they could help, and they just, at that point, sedated me again. Another interesting thing is, how objective can I be about what my behavior was really like? I don't know. This is my memory, it's my feeling. So it is an unanswerable question. I don't know whether I was being really unreasonable, whether I was being threatening and I don't remember. I am not necessarily holding it against the establishment. I didn't then go about, proceeding legally with them or anything like that. They were there, something went wrong, it was meant to be like this and it didn't work out, and I learned something from the experience. So there is no way that I can really know whether I was doing what I remember or whether it was actually different. Or whether there was this overriding question, maybe my brain actually just needed a rest and sedation was the best thing. And because I can't answer that question, I have to say, well, maybe they did know what they were doing. But I do know that they had enough of me because I was being disruptive. They'd had enough, so let's put her to sleep. So part of me is a little bit outraged by that, and part of me says, well, it could have actually been the best thing. And it's an unanswerable question, so we just leave it there and just say, that's what happened, now deal with it. Don't hold resentments and things. So that was the middle of 2003, and a very important thing that I did towards the end of that year was I actually wrote my story. I'd got to a point where I had learned things, I wanted to share my insights, and I wanted to document what I had done. I wrote it. It was a fabulous exercise. It was absolutely exhausting. And I had spoken to the editor of the South African Journal of Complementary Medicine, so I knew it was going to be published, and I said to her, please will you edit it? And they said they weren't going to edit it, they were going to publish it in its full form as the leader article, which gave me a bit of a fright, and so I went about editing it and tidying it up, making it like I wanted it, but I was very proud of it. It was very scary because it was an expose now. I was really standing up and saying, this is me, I've got bipolar disorder, I believe I'm cured. You can say that only proves that you're not, because it's a delusion of grandeur, which is another little catch-22. But whatever, I'm now coming public with it. And I didn't talk a lot about my family in there, and on purpose, because it's very difficult to start pulling them into something which I was writing about personally. It means that the picture isn't quite complete because it is something that sits in a family. So actually, if you want a full story, you really need to talk to my husband, my mother, my brother, and get the full picture. But it's not their journey. It was more my journey. So a very, very important step along the way was to acknowledge it, and a very helpful exercise to write. Anyway, that was 2003, and it's now 2006. And in the last 3 years, I haven't had any episodes. I haven't even had a particular high or low. I've just been bubbling along, being fairly creative, quite calm, settled, managing my life. And I like to stand up and say, look at me. I am managing my life as a mother, a wife, a complementary practitioner. I write, I do public speaking. I function in my society as an active member of my community, and it's not unusual. If I can do it, then so can you, and I want to tell my story to give hope to other people. I also don't want to take all the credit for it. I didn't do it on my own. I had lots of help. I had lots of physical massage and body work, complementary medical type help. I used homeopathy and naturopathy and herbs. I used meditation, yoga, I used psychiatry and medication, I used lithium, I used sleeping pills, I came off them when I could. My route isn't the route for everybody. Some people have to stay on medication and they manage their lives with that. Other people can try and come off. Some people come off and go and have another relapse. So my path isn't for everybody, but what I can stand here and say, I am managing my life, and therefore I want to give hope to other people. It's an extremely disruptive condition. It's very scary. And go out there and do all the things that I've talked about. Do all those things and more, because for you there'll be things that are more relevant. Don't hide behind the label of being bipolar. It was helpful to have it because I could research, I could talk, I could understand. because I now had something I could hang my hat on, as it were. But to use it as an excuse for when you fail and to not take responsibility for your own life because you've got this supposed illness, it's actually not really good enough. I mean, it really means you're not living your life to the full. You need to, I think one needs to grab it and say, there are aspects of this condition which are helpful. The creativity, the extra energy, it's very exciting. I don't need to have a manic attack in order to be creative. I can be creative by writing and doing art, and I can look after my body. I don't have to neglect it. It's just a much more healthy way of actually achieving what the manic episodes gave me in a much more calm, balanced way. And in fact, with some focus, you can be more creative. So you create the foundation on which to build a life where you can do all the things that before you could only do when you had a manic attack. The other thing that mania offers you is great liberation. It's fabulous. You can do anything you like. You can behave outrageously. You can run down the road naked. You can drive without hanging onto the steering wheel, which is what I was doing. I mean, I thought it was clever. It isn't. It's just stupid. But you can do and get away with anything. So it's fabulously liberating. You can say anything you like. All your bottled up feelings can just bubble out. But how disruptive is that? Rather learn an emotional vocabulary, understand yourself, express it in an effective way. Say to somebody, I'm really angry. They can say why. You can get to grips with it. Yeah, I'm really depressed. Bang your fists, cry. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be ill and have manic attacks and things to express your emotions. It's just not, it's not as effective. But I think it's quite important for people to understand that that is part of the addictiveness of the illness, because it's so fabulous to have that high and to be so creative and to have this ability to feel liberated and do whatever you like. There's an aspect of the condition that you don't really want to give up. And I have to admit, there's a part of the mania that I miss. It's very exciting. So I think it's important for the individual and for your supporters and your family to understand that addictive nature. If you can create an environment where you can get that buzz, then maybe you don't have a reason to be ill anymore. It's a step along the road. I'd like to talk a little bit about how practitioners can help people suffering with bipolar disorder, and then also how practitioners and sufferers can help at times when you're not in the middle of an episode. So let's say somebody is very manic at the moment. How can you as a supporter or a practitioner help them? And I think one of the most important things is to listen. You have to be extremely patient. They can be rambling. You can ask them one question and they'll still be answering it half an hour later with intricate detail and going over and over the same things again and again. They're thinking that it's very important. To a certain extent, you need to indulge them a little bit, but obviously